Hey everyone, I'm Dennis Fisher. I'm here with my friend Aidan Holland from the Census research team to talk about some cool research that Aidan did recently on those E-ZPass and toll road scam messages that a lot of us have been getting in the last, I don't know, probably 2 months. I think I probably got mine, the first one, right after New Year. I feel
Yeah,
like.
that's about when they started switching from the USPS phishing into the toll road phishing. It looks like it's the same group. They use all the same patterns, the same language in their messages, and so they normally have the USPS and DHL and like those type of ones, like your package has been seized or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
They always get people around the holiday times with like Christmas gifts and whatnot, and so it really really kind of picks up there.
It
Uh,
does. And the funny thing is, and I assume this was probably intentional, is they those started going out right after the holidays. So a lot of people have been driving, right? Like I just gotten back from a trip on which we took several toll roads, and you look at it and you're like, okay, this looks relatively good and official, but then you think, okay, well, I have like there's no unpaid thing. Like this is automatically hitting my credit card. Like there's no way it's unpaid. And
exactly.
also there's a simple, like there's a link trick that they use in the messages too, which like you and I would notice, but a lot of other people, if they're not sort of up on these phishing techniques, might sort of gloss over.
Yeah, and the other thing that kind of it makes it this all more the difficult is that the actual domains that for the real E-ZPass, like the actual payment sites, look kind of funny. Like it's like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
easypassma.org or like anything like they all have .coms, .org. It's hard to keep track of. So for an average person who's just kind of getting started in this stuff, it's pretty easy to miss. So it's definitely they're taking advantage of that inconsistency.
Yeah. So the link thing that I mentioned is sort of unique, or this is the first time that I had seen it, where the initial iMessage that you get says, "Hey, you have this unpaid toll. Here's," or here, and it's followed by a link, but the link is not active, and it asks you to reply in some way to the message, and then the link will become active, which
Yeah,
is a very subtle and sneaky way of taking advantage of a behavior in iMessage.
it is. And then the other thing that I've also started seeing them do is it sends you an image that contains the text on the instructions and then follows it up with a link. And so that interaction also they're trying to bypass the iMessage security features. But we've actually noticed that they send the message at the end says reply Y to pay or something along those lines. And it also tells you to exit the messaging app, copy the link into Safari or your browser. And we found that it actually matches what phone you have. So if you have iMessage, it will say close messages and open Safari. Or if you have an Android, it will say close SMS and then open your browser. So they have the language to target the specific folks. It almost kind of feels like A/B testing, where they're sending different things out and trying it, which truthfully is not an ineffective way to do this. And so it makes you wonder.
I wonder if have you gotten, so I have an iPhone. I haven't gotten one of the Android targeted ones yet. Do they have it on that level?
They do. So, when you type in someone's phone number for the first time in iMessage and it shows up either blue or green,
Yeah.
they're using that API behind the scenes to tell whether or not you have an iPhone and then
Okay.
giving you corresponding instructions.
So at scale, they're doing that
They
and
are,
figuring it
yeah.
out. Okay.
And it's about half and half. So I've actually seen them start to use plus one phone numbers like these last like 2 weeks. And target Android folks while they're still using the iCloud, Hotmail, like all the freebie email accounts
Yeah.
to target iMessage.
Have you, during the research, which I want to dig into more, did you go through the whole process of replying yes to any of these and then
I
like
did
with
not actually. So I was, a little hesitant, and most of the pictures I actually or the screenshots of these texts I received are from family and friends. So my clicking on that link might give them some indicator and try to like send my family and friends more notes. And so I've been trying to avoid that. But we have been able to access some of the payment sites. There was a couple, for example, like the Ohio Turnpike. They had a site that was pretty much the identical Ohio Turnpike site, and then just like in the notification section or like the messaging section, it said you might have an unpaid toll rather than like the standard like watch out for scams, which is what is actually there for the real website. But they did that for the Ohio folks and then also for the Virginia the DOT. they did the same thing. But a lot of the sites were actually down by the time that we got to it. So there's definitely some action being taken towards it.
Okay, so you decided to look into this, I don't know, say 2 or 3 weeks ago and
Yeah.
looking at the infrastructure and the domains behind it and all of that. So when you started digging into it, what were some of the things that you found that sort of grabbed your attention?
Yeah, so there are a couple things that kind of stood out to me. They were using a lot of these XIN domains, the top level domain, and then they were also using .win. Those are both like generally or typically Chinese domains or top level domains, and so that definitely stood out to me. They're also hosting everything in Alibaba or Tencent, and so it makes me think that there is some Chinese connection here. The servers themselves were in the United States, but they were on the Tencent and Alibaba networks. There was also a couple one-off domains or servers that were hosting some of these domains on like Google Cloud or AWS, but there was only like one or two of them compared to like the several hundred that we saw in Tencent and Alibaba.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that it has some type of Chinese group involvement.
Yeah. You mentioned that this is sort of picking up where those like package delivery scams left off. Have you seen any overlap in the infrastructure between those two
Yeah.
groups?
So as I was digging in, so there's a couple of things. So the pattern of the domains was very consistent. So it ended up, I'll use the Texas one for example. There's a Texas program called TX Tags. It's the same thing as E-ZPass, just in Texas. Um, so the domain is txtag.org, and then they would add a hyphen, four random characters, and then one of those sketchy domains. And so that was really consistent. We saw the identical pattern with the USPS and DHL phishing. So exact pattern, exact characters, exact .xin.top domain. Mind you, those are used by a lot of phishing because they're cheap domains. But we were noticing the identical patterns, not necessarily shared infrastructure, but they were in the same clouds. They were using the same domain registrars. They had the same patterns. So, odds are.
Okay. So those are all probably auto-generated domains, right?
I
For
would have to guess. Yeah, I
yeah.
think and that's part of the benefit is this group definitely has access to a large financial fund. They can spin up 60,000 domains kind of overnight. It doesn't take them too much. And for us, we can keep tracking them down, but they'll just keep changing these tactics. And as we've seen with the new like screenshot or the image text, those have used an entire different pattern of domains. So I think they've gotten smart about the current pattern they're using and how it's deceptive or easy to track.
Are the domains unique to each intended victim, like to each recipient?
So there is some targeting aspect of it, and so for example, like I have a 703 phone number, and so that's for Virginia, and so I was targeted by the Virginia DOT specific phishing scams. There were a couple other states they targeted, like we mentioned, Mass, Texas, Ohio, I think also Florida,
Florida.
uh,
Yeah.
Georgia, Canada, etc. Um, they they targeted those like metropolitan areas or like large cities in and around there. And then for the rest of them, they just did generic like easypass.org or like government.invoice or like stuff
Yeah.
like that, where
Yeah.
it was like generic enough to try to catch everybody. Some of it did feel a little bit more spear fishy, but it wasn't. I don't think they were targeting individuals more than they were targeting the individual regions.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of where they're getting these, phone numbers to send these things to, I know there's no real way to know specifically where they're getting them, but we have to assume they're from some giant data dump or they're buying them, from a forum somewhere, right?
Yeah, I that's my assumption. I have seen some funny one-off cases where I had a coworker who renewed their registration in Virginia, and within a day or so, they received the text. So I have to assume there's some type of connection. There's also a lot of databases that are shared by insurance providers and advertisers. And so I'm wondering if they're buying multiple of these data sets and kind of mashing them together and then targeting specific folks from there. Um, Obviously, that's all speculation, but I'd be curious to see, if other folks have been targeted or been avoided. It's been kind of hit or miss with the folks I've been talking to.
Yeah, I would imagine that those DMV and RMV databases are super high value targets. I mean, if you're in one of those, you're like the records that are in a DMV database are everything you need, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it definitely, it sparked that part of the imagination where, it was like,
Yeah.
what if they did? And, I don't have anything to say that they are compromised. However, they were the only DOT that was targeted. So I found that to be a little interesting. Um, Mind you, I believe that they are also involved in the toll collection process. And so it was an easier, oh, let's just tack that on. But it did scratch that part of my brain where it's like, did they do something?
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is, in some states the tolls are collected by the state itself, but in other cases they're collected by a private contractor that then, sends some portion of them to the state, right?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's been really bizarre. They've done a lot of different ways of kind of targeting those. For example, like the E-ZPass or Easy Drive MA. Uh, Sometimes you'd find that in the domain, and sometimes you'd find that in the URL path. So they were trying like multiple different techniques to target Massachusetts folks. And so I found that kind of interesting too, where they kind of doubled down on it. I hadn't seen that in the other patterns I'd received.
So they're definitely doing some research here. This is not just a bunch of dum-dums in a, call center somewhere trying to work this out.
Yeah.
They've got
Yeah. So
some
there's
sort
definitely
of.
some insight into this process, and there's a lot of insight into existing trickery and what has worked.
Yeah. What's the scale of the domain infrastructure that you were able to find?
Yeah. So I found about 60,000 domains. There are potentially more with the USPS and the DHL component of it. If you add those domains into the existing pattern, it actually blows up to 140,000. I assume a lot of those are run by other groups who are also trying to fish USPS and DHL. And so I can't say for certain that all of those belong to this campaign, but those 60,000 are, they all follow the identical patterns. And so
Okay.
it makes it hard to kind of skip over.
Do you have a sense of how long they're using each of those domains, like what the ephemerality is for them?
So yeah, for some of it, it's a little tricky because they kind of hide behind Cloudflare, and so
Yeah.
Cloudflare will kind of serve that for a little longer. We have seen reports of this starting back in August of last year. So end of summer break, kind of moving into it. Same thing what you're talking about. Getting back from the holidays, doing all the driving. You possibly have gone through a toll road, so it makes people a little bit more inclined to click that button. That's the same purpose of those. It's $7 or it's like $5.99. It's not $5.99. They're just going to resell your credit card number. Like the purchase is just the hook.
Right. That's what I was wondering is I don't think any of the ones that I've gotten have an actual dollar figure in them.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have to respond and go through the whole.
So yeah, a couple of them just had it in the first initial message. You owe this much on a delinquent toll. There were then some that you had to click in to the site, and then it showed you how much you owed. That was true for the Ohio Turnpike folks. And so it's really they're trying so many different things. So
Yeah,
it's yeah, it really feels like A/B testing, truthfully.
it really does. And it also, these things, phishing is a problem at scale, and they're counting on obviously a very low return rate, but they're sending out tens or hundreds of thousands of these things. And if they get a 0.5% hit on those and they're getting $6 or $7 or whatever it is, $10, just as those initial, victim payments. But as you said, then they have your credit
Yeah.
card information or debit card, God help you,
Yeah.
and
Oh goodness.
see you later, right?
Yeah. Well, truthfully, I don't even think the first initial purchase goes through. I don't think they check it. I'm pretty
Oh,
confident it's just a collection mechanism. Um,
okay. So you think you go and pay the 7.99 toll, it
yeah, I
doesn't
doubt it would
actually
charge
happen.
anything.
They take that and go to Best Buy or whatever,
Yeah, exactly. Or honestly, I'm sure they're reselling them on
reselling
different
them.
forums
Yeah,
for credit card resales.
in giant packages.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Those make it way easier, and I'm sure half of them are fake or have wrong information or
Yeah.
are locked to a certain country. So it makes the odds of it kind of funny.
It does make you think that they're going through a ton of work to get this done, and it's hard to say what the return is, but if they do get, you know, a handful that are big enough returns for them, like, what's it costing them to send out a bunch of SMSs? Not that much,
Yeah.
right?
No, not that much at all. And we looked into the different SIMs that they were using. So obviously, like the +1 area code for the US, like those will be some of the most expensive phone numbers that they're purchasing. The lower, less expensive are the UK and the Philippines ones.
Mhm.
Those SIMs that, they go for, 50 cents less or so whatever it is. It's rather inexpensive.
Yeah.
And so they bought a bunch of those as well as set up a bunch of those iCloud and Hotmail domains or emails. And I'm not sure with those. I've looked into it a couple times. I've not seen indicators that those emails were like compromised emails. But part of me wonders if they were included in a compromise because spinning up a number of iCloud accounts in that span of time can be a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you have a SIM for each one, they all have their own IP addresses. And so it makes it a little bit easier to make all these accounts in bulk. But it is they either have a phone farm or someone sitting there manually cranking out accounts. And either way, it's a pain to maintain, and I'm sure it's causing someone a great deal of headaches.
It could be a little bit of both. Like the phone farm thing is the first thing that occurred to me. But then there's also those essentially, forced labor operations, especially in Southeast Asia and other places where people think they're getting work from home job or, something like that. And they show up and they're essentially stuck in, we've seen some operations targeting them in the last few months. So it could be that kind of infrastructure too.
Yeah, and I've heard whispers of a potential more and more of those cell phone type operations being spun up in scale in less inhabited areas of Southeast Asia,
Hmm.
and so it definitely someone's bringing in a lot of money, and it makes you wonder who's doing that, why, you know,
Yeah.
and is it working, and are they actually getting return?
Well, if they're willing to invest the money, that means they think there's money to be made, right? Or they've already made a decent amount of money at it, or someone has, and they,
For sure,
you know,
some
it,
combination of all of that, truthfully.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no real way to tell if this is one group or multiple. I would guess at this point it's multiple groups that are
Yeah,
involved.
so I'm sure multiple groups are doing it. This campaign, though, specifically, I believe is being run by a single organization. It could be, multiple organizations going off and targeting different areas, or however that breakdown works. But because of the pattern of domains, because of the pattern of the servers, it's they're all running the same version of Nginx, so it would be really hard for this to accidentally happen. And so
Right.
I suspect that they are either sharing templates or sharing techniques or sharing the pattern for the domains or some combination.
Yeah, I was thinking about this in the connection that you founded Chinese infrastructure and that sort of thing. Had that been North Korean infrastructure, you'd think, okay, this is probably somehow tied to the North Korean government. They tend to go for cryptocurrency theft or hijacking, but they also tend to fund their government operations through cybercrime. But that's
Absolutely.
not something we've specifically seen yet with the Chinese government, as far as I can recall.
Yeah, so they
At
have
least not
been.
directly.
Yeah, so they do. North Korea itself doesn't have a lot of like hosting providers or service providers. I believe they have a single or possibly two internet service providers in the entire country. They don't host any public, infrastructure. Most of the time, you do see North Korean stuff being spun up in China or Russia, and so you also wonder when you see these things. It's anyone can technically register a Chinese entity and register these domains, but you either have to have those right connections or that right involvement, and so uh, it would be speculatory, but it's not improbable that they could potentially be involved here, but I don't have anything proving that necessarily, but it is a pattern that we've seen before.
Yeah. So is this something that you're going to continue to follow and do more digging on?
Yeah, I'd like to. I think they'll continue to change their patterns, and so something that we've been doing is trying to track these new patterns within the Census platform to make sure that we can alert customers about this stuff. We might talk about some of this part of this publicly, but as they continue to change and evolve, it might be easier to track them if we're not exposing all of the
Yeah.
indicators. I think it's just a good first run for this, and it's really important for us that we share these indicators with the community to make sure that we are, preventing the spread of it or using this for takedowns or other purposes. That being said, though, you kind of have to find that nice balance.
Yeah, totally. All right, Aidan, thanks so much, man. This is great research, and thanks for sharing it with everybody.
Thanks so much for having me.
See ya.